Welcome to the Artist Work Ethic Podcast. I'm Mike Pelak. I'm an actor, screenwriter, and filmmaker who's always looking to maximize my time and potential as I work to break in. In this podcast, I talk to artists of all kinds who have seen success in their fields about their process, habits, and work ethic. Today on the show is Frank Turner. Frank Turner is an English punk and folk singer-songwriter. He began his career as the vocalist of post-hardcore band Million Dead, then embarked upon a primarily acoustic-based solo career following the band's split in 2005. To date, Turner has released 9 solo albums, 1 split album, and 5 EPs. His 9th and most recent studio album, Frank Turner Hardcore, reached number 1 in the UK albums chart in the week following its release. A couple quick things before we jump into the episode. I've talked in the past about myself working on breaking into screenwriting. Please check out blackoilfilms.com/screenwriting. There you can check out some of the screenplays I've written. I have the first 10 pages of each one uploaded, but feel free to email me at theartistsworkethicpodcast@gmail.com, and I'd be happy to send you a full script if you're interested in reading. Last thing before we get into the episode, I would love anyone listening to subscribe, rate, and review the Artist's Work Ethic Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. It really helps us put the show out there for more people to listen to. Frank, thanks for coming on with me today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So through punk rock, we both come from a DIY or DIY influenced background. How has DIY and that ethic contributed to or informed your work ethic?
I mean, in the sort of on the conscious level, it's pretty much all of it, actually. I do think that there's more to talk about here, which we'll get into in a second. You know, I fell in love with music and pretty quickly found my way to punk rock, and the DIY ethic was one of the most attractive parts of it. That and the sense of kind of a welcome gathering space for weirdos and misfits and outsiders. That was also very important. But because I got into some punk records and I bought The Clash and Black Flag and stuff like that. And then I found out that there were actually people doing this right now in London. When I say right now, I mean in like 1997. But like, you know, there were people putting on shows and playing in hardcore and punk bands. And I sort of managed, I was fortunate enough, me and a friend, to sort of like track down the kind of center of it, and the barrier to entry was showing up. Essentially, it was like, if you're here and you want to be part of this, then you are part of it. That's it. And like, there was something so empowering about that. You know, you didn't need to be cool, and you didn't need to have years on your punk CV or anything like that. It was just kind of like, you're here, you're part of it. And then within that, it was kind of like, well, you know, there was a brief moment of feeling a bit like when people, you know, I recently reread Michael Azerrad's Our Band Could Be Your Life, and one of the defining things about sort of 80s punk rock and indie, it wasn't that it was a conscious choice to stay away from the main structures of the music industry. It's that the idea that anyone from that world would be interested in what they were doing was just ludicrous, you know, and like no one in the hardcore scene in London in the late 90s had any thoughts about anything else happening. So it was kind of this really sort of positive and inspiring scene, because there wasn't this kind of like edge of, well, maybe, about kind of larger kind of structures and stuff. And it was just really cool. It was like, and within a couple of years, I did a zine, of which I did 1 issue, which was the worst zine ever made by humans ever.
I think I did the same thing, and I interviewed Bo from Avail and one of the guys from John Cougar concentration camp.
Right, yeah. I interviewed, actually, funnily enough, I interviewed Guy Picciotto from Fugazi, who replied to my emails, incredibly enough. Yeah, did this dreadful zine. I put on a show. It was amazing. The first show that I put on, me and my friend put it on, and did all the build up to the show, and it was at a place called the Hope and Anchor in London, which is legendarily where the Pistols started out and everything. And there's the basement's like, it's like 100 cap room, if that, and we had 3 bands on the bill, and we sold it out. But when we got there on the day, the guy who ran the venue discovered that we were both underage. We were both like 16, and was like, "This can never happen again." Yeah. So that was a roadblock in my promoting career, should we say?
Yeah.
And then like my band, Knee Jerk, which we did a UK tour in the summer of '98. 1998, there was a BYOL page in the back of Fracture, which was the kind of first UK-wide zine at the time. And it was the first one that was free because it was paid for by advertising, which at the time was pretty novel. And it had a book your own life section. And me and my two 16-year-old friends booked a tour of the UK in the summer of '98 with that and the payphone at our school. And so you know, what I'm trying to say is a lot of my early experiences were all kind of informed by the DIY ethic. And I like to think that at least the kind of mindset behind that is something that I've carried forward to this day.
Absolutely. And I think one of the interesting things is that you are very open about, here's my email address. And I think that's one of those things that I think you could tie a direct line to work ethic in that most people are not going to sit there generally and, you know, entertain whatever volume of emails are coming in. And I guess that kind of leads me to asking, in general, you know, I know you're either on tour or you're not on tour, but how are you structuring your day to balance your life and your productivity?
That's a good question. I mean, as a brief thing, though, by the way, the email thing, like when I was a kid, I emailed 3 people. I emailed Guy Picciotto, I emailed Henry Rollins, and I emailed Chris from Propaganda, and all 3 of them wrote back to me. And I'm still telling that story 25 years later. Do you know what I mean? And I probably answer 50, 60 emails a day. And I'm not saying that every single one of those people is going to be telling a story in 25 years like this, but some of them might, and that feels like paying it forward. I must admit, like it's interesting that you asked that question now, because I have in recent years been trying to restructure what I do a little bit in sort of post-pandemic almost, I want to say. But I mean, because basically the thing is, like, the idea of being that accessible is centered around an ideological statement, which is that there's no difference between performer and audience, and that music is a conversation amongst community. And I do believe those things pretty profoundly. Of course, on a practical level, it is the case that, like, particularly if I'm like playing larger venues, I mean, I no longer go and just hang out in the crowd for the sport bands. That would be kind of ludicrous to do when you've got several thousand people coming to a show. It's not really doable. It's not really manageable. Yeah. And particularly in the world of social media, there are people who I feel like, I'm trying to put this in the best way possible, but like they haven't quite signed up to the egalitarian principle that I've signed up to, and they use that access in a way that isn't just me having a straight up conversation with somebody else, but becomes kind of needful or like trying to get something. Do you know what I mean? And it's like it's not quite on a level anymore. And I guess one of the things as well is that we live in what I call the gotcha culture, which is that an awful lot of what happens on social media is about people. A lot of it is a game about trying to catch people out. This is a gigantic bad faith machine that we call Twitter and all the rest of it. And on some levels, I have to be a little defensive about that. And this is all a long-winded way of saying that, like, this is my phone, and this is the center of my anxiety issues that I have, which I have many, and one of my current things at the moment is trying to kind of like decouple from technology a little bit. So like these days social media is entirely a professional rather than personal thing for me. I do still answer my emails, but what I'm trying to do is like set aside an hour every day to just do that, rather than constantly just reading what's coming in, because I don't think it's very good for my mental health and creativity, because ultimately
it just sucks up your focus.
It does. Every hour I spend doing that is an hour I'm not kind of writing or playing music. You know?
Yeah.
So I mean, and that has changed over time. But I mean, broadly speaking, I still do keep up with it. And it's funny because at every different stage of my career, somebody somewhere has gone, well, maybe now's the time to stop doing that whole email on your website thing. And I never have to date. And, you know, there's been hate mail and there's been controversy phishing, if you see what I mean. That's come through. And I get people who have issues, should we say, send me emails in a way that can be slightly difficult for me. But the vast majority of it is a positive experience. I have a cool conversation with people who come to my shows, and I like to think that it gives me a pretty good sense of what's happening in my audience as well.
Sure. So I guess to touch on the how are you balancing your day generally to you talked about that you'll take your email and section it off to a specific period. Do you try to allocate daily time to writing, or is it just so super dependent on what you're up to that particular day?
Yeah, I mean, writing is something that I still find quite ephemeral in a way that I think is good. it changes over time. It changes because I've written at least 9 records, and that changes the writing and all the rest of it. And like, you know, funnily enough, actually, I'm in a place right now where when we get off this tour that we're on right now, I'm actually going to set myself like a scheduled weekly writing routine, which I've never actually done before. And I'm going to experiment with that. I know it's something that Nick Cave does a lot, who is a huge inspiration to me in many ways. And my wife and I moved out of the city, and I have like a studio, and I'm going to set myself like 2 days a week to just write all day and see what happens.
Nice.
Before now, I mean, generally speaking, obviously I have periods when I write more than others, but it's generally just sort of an ongoing background process. I mean, it is worth saying that like, I'm somebody who thrives with a bit of structure in my life. And one of the reasons I love touring is that, contrary to some of the cliches about it, it's a pretty structured routine. You know, I get up at a certain time and I get given a day sheet that explains to me what I'm doing with my day, and we sound check at the same time, and I eat at the same time. And do you know what I mean? There's rhythm to it, yeah. You know, and I find that quite useful. And actually, because I've been touring since I was so young, one of the big tasks of my recent adult life has been trying to sort of find kind of measure and structure in my non-touring life. And for a long time that was a car crash because I had issues with drugs. And the drugs thing was funny because that didn't affect me that much because I toured so much. I'd come home for like 2 days, get fucked up, go on tour again, no problem. And then I started having more time off tour, and it turns out that you can take drugs for a lot longer than 2 days, if you so wish. But you know, building some kind of like rhythm and structure into my home life has been, and for writing and for creativity, but for everything really, and that's just how I function.
In thinking about like goal setting, long term, short term, I know you've played, I think, literally thousands of shows. You know, so
2,697.
Damn, so we're inching up to 3,000. So I mean, there had to be some kind of, I assume, there was some kind of a vision, you know, whether it was when you know, back in the campfire punk rock days and all the way up until now. And I guess, how are you goal setting on a short-term or long-term basis to kind of, you know, keep that vision moving forward?
That's a good question. I mean, the short-term is the simpler question to answer in a way, just in the sense that, like, you know, right now we're touring my current record. I'm starting to think seriously about my next record, in both in terms of writing and in terms of label structure and that kind of thing, because I've just finished a record deal, which no one ever does, which is cool, you know, like I'm out of contract, and not because I got dropped. It's fucking crazy. Yeah. So, you know, so there's all those kinds of things going on, and there's a business side to what I do, of course there is, you know, and part of that's kind of managing my finances, but part of it's ethical as well, you know, it's trying to make sure that I do things in a way that I think is fair to the people I work with and my audience and blah, blah, blah. So there's all that going on. Longer term, I mean, life goals, whatever, I mean, it's kind of vague, but there is definitely something there. I mean, one of the things I always wanted to do was be like Black Flag in terms of my touring schedule, you know, and like going to the concept of work ethic, I have a grand sort of theory that there is a very, very strong line of cultural DNA between American Puritanism and American hardcore. I mean, Rick, come on, straight edge. Do you know what I mean? Like, let's talk about that. But so there's that going on. And also, I mean, to be 100% honest, like, I come from a pretty comfortable white collar family background, and like touring is my blue collar. You know, it's the thing. It's my honest day's work for an honest day's pay kind of thing, and that. I didn't have that in any other part of my life, and as ridiculous and as pretentious as it may sound, like, to me, one of the things like about touring is that I get up and I do my job all day, and I go to bed tired because I did my job and I did it well, you know, and I like that side of it, and that's something that I totally envisage being a part of my life. But to answer your question, I mean, like, goals, the goals are, they're more like, I don't want to repeat myself, I don't want to be boring, and I don't want to be bored. I want to make sure that if I'm out there making art, that I have something to say, and that I am having a conversation. You know, so it's quite vague.
Yeah, no, I hear you though. I mean, how important would you say, specific to, you know, a career in the arts, how important would you say persistence and perseverance are, you know, to that work ethic?
Startling, like hugely important. I don't think that I know anybody who's been successful in the arts who doesn't have a strong work ethic and a strong sense of perseverance. And it's not just in the sense that, like, you know, I think it's safe to say that we live in a world right now where, generally speaking, the supply of arts exceeds the demand, and therefore it is hard to be an actor or to be a musician or a writer or whatever. There's a lot of people trying to do it, so you have to persevere. You have to. I think one of the things for me is being my own harshest critic, if possible. Do you know what I mean? Be super hyper self-critical and try it as a method of self-improvement. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I finished this song. It's pretty good. How could it be better? Last night's show was a good one. What could I improve on? What could I do better? How could I communicate with the audience better? What set list would make more sense? Whatever it might be. So there's all that kind of thing. But, you know, I mean, like, I have in my time, because I'm old now, you see, I have in my time known people in bands who've, like, got signed and just kind of, like, kicked back and been like, yeah, that's me. And it's like, what are you fucking talking about? That's when the job starts, you know? Just on a practical level, you know, and like, you think Bob Dylan didn't work his ass off? Come on, do you know what I mean? And like the Ramones, please, you know, and they're not a band that I like, but to pick what I think of is this sort of almost like the annoying archetype of rock and roll decadence. Guns N' Roses worked their asses off to get what they had. I mean, they were god awful, but nevertheless, it took them time to hone, not just to hone their sound and their craft, but to draw the attention of the people around them and to create what they created, you know? So yes, I think persistence and a hard work ethic is like utterly vital to any sort of creative success.
Awesome. Anything that you want to plug or talk about before we go?
I have a new record out. It's called FTHC. I mean, which is in many ways relevant to everything that we've been discussing today. Americans know what the HC stands for. English people less so. But hey, no, yeah. I mean, there's a new record out. I'm going to be touring more next year, no doubt.
Awesome, Frank. Thanks for coming on with me today.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for listening today. Please subscribe to the Artist Work Ethic podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts, and please rate and review the show. Follow us on Instagram at The Artist's Work Ethic, and check out theartistsworkethic.com.